Hey there folks, Wrel here. Today we'll be reviewing Titanfall's Smart Pistol Mk5. We'll be breaking down all the details, giving you recommendations on how to use it effectively, how to counter those who use it, and we'll also be discussing a little bit as to why people generally frown on this weapon. Also, before we get started, in the description below there will be some links to sources that some of you may find helpful. The Smart Pistol is one of the most versatile weapons in the game, and tends to get a lot of hate because of it. It has a starting magazine size of 12 with 120 ammo in reserve, and that magazine can be extended out to 18 rounds with the right attachment. It reloads in 1.45 seconds short and 1.49 seconds long, so regardless of whether you expend your magazine or not, that reload time is extremely short and not something that you really have to worry about. While the Smart Pistol is in hand, you move at 100% movement speed, and all pistols and SMGs allow you to do this, but while you're holding anything else, you're going to be moving at 95% movement speed. Not a huge difference, but I figured it was worth mentioning. The Smart Pistol, without a lock, deals 67 damage at all ranges, and this means that it takes 3 shots to the chest to kill an enemy pilot, as pilots and specters have 200 health, while grunts have 100. But if you equip a suppressor, that 3-shot kill range is going to jump up to a 4-shot kill range, but it does not adjust the amount of lock-ons required to make a kill, and we'll be covering that in a bit more depth later. While aiming down sights and firing, the weapon is very difficult to use, mainly because the barrel kicks up to an annoying degree and it tends to obscure your vision of the target, especially at longer distances. That said, the feature that sets the Smart Pistol apart from any other weapon in the game is its lock-on mechanic. Now the Smart Pistol can lock on to practically anything that moves, including grunts, pilots, grenades, and even rockets and triple threat grenades fired from Titan primary weapons. The best part about this feature, however, is that it locks on from the hip, meaning that you can use it while wall running, jumping, falling, ziplining, and hanging onto walls. If you aim down sights, however, the lock-on feature is disabled. While enemies are within the reticule, you're going to lock onto their vulnerable points, and grunts and grenades have 1 vulnerable point, specters have 2, and pilots have 3. That said, the actual lock-on times depend on the attachments that you have equipped, as well as whether or not your target is cloaked, and what type of target they are. With a default setup, so no attachments, it'll take you about 1.4 seconds to establish 3 consecutive locks on an enemy pilot. With a suppressor equipped, it'll take you a little bit longer at 1.6 seconds, and with an enhanced targeting Smart Pistol, it'll take you closer to 1.2 seconds. The amped Smart Pistol, however, only requires 2 full locks on an enemy pilot in order to kill them, opposed to the standard 3, and it can achieve these 2 locks in about 0.9 seconds, so much faster than the other setups. It can still lock 3 times if you let it, but it's just not necessary to drop your target. So you can basically say that your lock-on time correlates to how much damage your weapon actually does in relation to the amount of health your target has. The suppressor is going to lower your damage, the enhanced targeting is going to increase it, and the amped Smart Pistol is going to increase it even more. That said, all of the testing was done in the field and then broken down in video using the best clips that I could find at 30 frames per second. It's not a consistent and controlled environment, so I may have made some mistakes, but I also feel like the actual lock-on times seem to have some slight variation based on the distance at which you lock onto your target as well. And given my time spent using the Smart Pistol with each attachment, this seems to be where things sort of fall in line. But if you do happen to come up with more precise numbers, I will annotate the video, so make sure to let me know. It's also worth noting that if your target is cloaked, it's going to take you about twice as long to acquire a single lock on your target. So if you're using a suppressor and trying to lock onto a cloaked target, you're really just wasting your time. For grunts and specters, their lock-on times are a little bit different at 0.1 and 0.2 seconds respectively. This makes the Smart Pistol amazing at attrition-based games where minion kills mean much more than just calling in your next Titan. Also, lock-ons against multiple targets are acquired independent of one another unless you're locking on to multiple pilots. So if you lock onto 2 pilots within the same reticule, you have to finish locking onto the first one before you start locking onto the second one. The last thing you should know about locking onto a target is that as soon as your reticule turns red, you can pull the trigger and kill your target, provided all the shots hit. If the pilot you're locking onto has already lost some health, then you're probably going to see the reticule turn red before you even finish out the 3rd lock. You'll still be able to lock onto them 3 times, of course, but it just won't be necessary. Red equals dead. In this freeze frame, I've cut the screen in half. This is going to show you how far away your target can be, as well as how wide your lock-on reticule is, with and without the enhanced targeting attachment. As far as recommended attachments goes, if you have trouble with individual pilots, then pull the enhanced targeting attachment to increase your lock-on speed and range. Just remember that it will also narrow your lock-on field, and if you have trouble with targets eluding your crosshairs, then this can actually lead to longer lock-on times, so it is a legitimate trade-off from the factory issue settings. The suppressor attachment will of course keep you off the radar, but it also seems to increase the time it takes to lock onto targets. Given that Smart Pistol users should always be moving in the first place, I'm not exactly sure how useful the suppressor actually is for most playstyles. But I suppose if you play with a more cloaked, campy sort of playstyle, then this might be right up your alley. My favorite attachment is likely the extended magazines, simply because there's no downside to using them. Your reload speed is already good, and you will hardly ever use up a full magazine unless you're just hip-firing the weapon, but I also like using the larger lock-on area, especially in attrition game modes where harvesting minions is extremely powerful. So, that said, what are the real strengths and weaknesses of the Smart Pistol, why do people have such a problem with it, and how do you use it and combat it effectively? The real problem with the Smart Pistol, and people have already rehashed this time and time again, is that your target has absolutely no clue that they're being locked onto. So if you're a victim, you aren't getting a chance to fight back unless you already know that the pilot is there. The inability to fight back is extremely frustrating, especially for a newer player. This is why people have a problem with one-shot sniper rifles, and it's why people have a problem with shotguns. Now there is an argument that the Smart Pistol is supposed to be a tool for newer players, because people think, hey, lock-on pistols don't require aim, it must be for noobs, it must be easy to use, and the problem with that argument is that the Smart Pistol is not most effectively used in the hands of a beginner. It's not a proper stepping stone to other weapons, and it's not something that you'll eventually outgrow. It's just the opposite. Instead of having skillful aim, the Smart Pistol requires a very different type of skill. You have to have the ability to get the drop on your target while you finish your lock-on, and this really requires a solid grasp on the movement mechanics in Titanfall. Most of the player base that I've seen flocking to Titanfall doesn't understand how to move yet. They come from Battlefield 3, they come from Battlefield 4, and they come from Call of Duty, but where they aren't coming from, at least not in bulk, are games like Tribes and Brink. And if you have a background in either game, you've probably figured out Titanfall pretty quickly. It should come second nature. The people who are really frustrated by this weapon are the ones that do not have these skills yet. Like we said before, the Smart Pistol requires 0.9 seconds of lock-on time at its absolute best, to about 3.2 seconds at its absolute worst. And technically, the only thing you need to do to stop a Smart Pistol user dead in their tracks is to know where the pilot is and pull the trigger. Every other primary weapon in the game right now can kill more quickly at the Smart Pistol's effective range, save for maybe the shotgun, in which case you'll have to get a little bit closer to your target. And I'm not saying that it's easy to counter Smart Pistol users. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it's much easier to get good with the Smart Pistol than it is to deal with the players who use them. I don't necessarily believe that this makes the weapon overpowered, like a lot of people tend to claim, but I do believe that it creates a steep power disparity between skilled and unskilled players until you become about a mid-tier player, and then things will even out. That said, let's get into some quick pointers on how to use the Smart Pistol effectively, why you should or should not use it, and how to supplement its weaknesses. And then we'll roll into how to deal with people who are actually using the Smart Pistol. The first tip is to basically be good at movement. You should be wall running, you should be jumping, you should be using terrain to your advantage. You want to stay above your enemies as long as possible and lock onto them without being directly in their line of sight. This way, by the time your target has noticed you, if they even notice you at all you'll need to do is squeeze the trigger. Sometimes the smartest way to use a Smart Pistol is to not use one at all. The Smart Pistol does have a pretty lenient effective range, but you'll still get outclassed by shotguns and SMGs in close quarters, as well as every other weapon at longer ranges. That being the case, if you find yourself indoors and don't want to get a face full of shotgun, then remember that you can always pick up weapons that enemies drop. In Titanfall, even the minions drop carbines and shotguns, and pilots will drop whatever they happen to have equipped on them at the time. So if you see another weapon on the ground, you probably want to swap over to your secondary and exchange it for something better suited to your situation. The next tip is to don't be afraid to disengage. Sometimes your targets will be weaving in and out of cover or just beyond your lock-on distance, and sometimes they'll do it while they're cloaked. If you fire at them before you're fully locked on, you end up giving away your biggest advantage, which is the element of surprise. Try to go for the surefire kills only, at least until you become more comfortable with the weapon. Another thing to understand is that if you do end up blowing your element of surprise, or even if you round a corner and run face first into a bad guy, you don't need to wait for a lock. You can hipfire this weapon to the best of your ability, and I think you'll be surprised at how capable it can actually be. On the other side of that, a lot of players simply don't have very good aim, so being patient and just hopping around while facing your enemy and waiting for your pistol to lock on will oftentimes be more effective than trying to kill them with your hipfire. The last tip I'd like to share is to air detonate your grenades. Not all the time obviously, but remember that it is an option. It takes a split second to lock onto a grenade mid-flight, but it'll cut your standard detonation timer by a great deal. This gives you unparalleled control over that burst damage, and it has saved me more times than I can remember. So those are just some rough guidelines for using the Smart Pistol well, but how do we deal with one? Even if you say that you'll never ever use one and you have too much honor and whatever else makes you all warm and fuzzy, understand that a lot of players will be using it. The first tip is to not make yourself an easy target. In Titanfall, you don't sit around, you don't try to out-camp your enemy unless you're defending a flag room. You need to be moving, you need to be jumping, you need to be bouncing and climbing, and in fact, the more time that you spend on the ground floor, the bigger a target you become, not just for the Titans, but for all the pilots literally looking down on you. Unless you're caught out in the open, or getting pounced on from above, dying to a Smart Pistol user should be a rare occurrence. Weaving in and out of cover makes it extremely difficult for enemies to maintain and finish locking on. If you see a Smart Pistol user on the rooftops across from you, it's generally not a good idea to challenge them head on. Most weapons have poor accuracy while jumping, running, or climbing. The Smart Pistol is not one of those weapons. If they see you when you try to move in on them, you're going to get locked and you're going to get dropped. Instead, you want to use your range to outdamage them. Most weapons are much more effective than the Smart Pistol at range, and you'll either force them to run away or close the distance on you. And either way, you have the upper hand. If you don't see a Smart Pistol user but notice that you're having some issues with them in the current match, then try pulling a burn card or a loadout that will let you see through walls. Packet Sniffer, Spider Sense, and Radar Pulses allow you to gain that awareness of everything that's going on. Eventually, your situational awareness will become good enough that you won't be using these burn cards defensively, and you'll know, okay, this is a bad place to be, I heard a Smart Pistol nearby, what can I do about it? And then you'll figure out how to outmaneuver them. So until then, keep moving, use your cloak, use your range, and be situationally aware. Overall, I don't think that the Smart Pistol is overpowered, but I do think that it will be some time before the player base eventually evolves to the point where everyone not only understands, but can also proficiently execute the counters. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and I'm curious about hearing your thoughts on the Smart Pistol. Specifically, I want to know roughly how many times you've actually died to a Smart Pistol so far, and if you think that all of the complaints are a victim of lack of experience, or if you think that there is truly something wrong with the weapon. Leave those thoughts, love, hatred in the comment section down below. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.
I'm still detecting IMT pilots in the area. Cut them off before they get to the evac point. You're at the enemy evac point. Clear the area of enemy pilots.